All right, so I think we can get started. So this particular topic is a very important one, and one of the nice things about it is people are actually talking about it now. But what I'm going to do is talk about mental health from a holistic perspective, because one thing that I firmly believe in, being a holistic health practitioner, is taking a segregated approach alone is not going to create a lasting result. It doesn't mean we don't spend a bit more time focusing on one area, but it is really important to get a comprehensive overview and understand how systems interrelate, especially with the mind and the emotions. You can't separate the mind and the emotions from our physiology either. So, holistic mental health. So if we can get the first slide up. So what does holistic even mean? And this is where it all starts. So holistic means wholeness, means at one with, and it means integrated. So it means everything is coming together. So we cannot separate the mind from the body from the mind, and we cannot separate our relationships from other people with our own health, and also our relationship with the outside world either. All of it comes together and interrelates with each other. So that means, as per the yin-yang symbol, we need a balance between yin and yang. So that's the balance between the masculine and the feminine polarities, hot and cold, light and dark, so to speak. But we get issues when that balance is not there. So what we need is the middle part. Okay. Happiness and health is when we can walk down life going down the middle of that. It doesn't mean we won't have moments where we shift a bit more one side, thinking about two banks of a river, but if our sort of default reset point is in back to that middle ground, we're going to be able to manage the challenges that will inevitably come along. And from a Czech Institute holistic perspective, this is based on the 4 doctors, which are Dr. Happiness, Dr. Movement, those are the 2 yang doctors, Dr. Quiet, and Dr. Diet, those are the 2 yin doctors. Those are the ones that restore us and allow us to rest. And also, with regards to mental health, it's based on getting this right. I, and then we, and then all. Most of life teaches us to do we, then I, and then all. We can't give what we don't have. So if we don't get that order right, we give everything and we have nothing, and then we're just fatigued, tired, sick, depressed, anxious, and life just becomes a mess. It's not to judge that, because getting that wrong can also teach us a lot. So it's not to judge being in that, like from my side as a coach or from the individual having individual experiencing it. And I've been through that as well. Like I'm no greater or holier than that. Like I've gone through my own challenges as well. But it teaches us something. We need to be aware of that order. I, and then we, and then all. So the Czech Institute itself, founded by Paul Czech, stands for Corrective Holistic Exercise Kinesiology. So it's a holistic, integrated approach, taking into account the spirit, the mind, emotions, and physicality, in an approach to high performance athletic training and lifestyle coaching, which includes mental health as well. And because this presentation is focused on the mind and the emotions, what we're going to take into account is Carl Jung's quote here, who was one of the pioneers of psychology in the early 20th century. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living in suitable cases. So going back to I, and then we, and then all, to get the I right, we have to figure out what that is. So we can't live life for someone else, because someone else's life is going to pinch us. Doesn't mean we don't listen to what their advice is as well, but we have to take the time to introspect and find out what's right for my life. What do I need? And when we can get that, then we can walk down the middle of the yin-yang symbol and we can have balance. Can we have the other slide, please? So before we get into the specifics, we need to just go over a bit of the basics. the holistic foundations, because you can't get specific without foundations, and without foundations it's not holistic. So the 4 doctor model, Dr. Quiet, Dr. Diet, Dr. Happiness and Dr. Movement, they go down into the 6 foundation health principles. So the 3 yin are sleep, nutrition and hydration. And in terms of the mind and the emotions, it's quite easy to feel a bit more anxious and depressed if you are sleep deprived. That's one of the reasons why it's a method of torture. The yang principles, breathing, thinking and movement. And another key one with regards to mental health, Dr. Happiness. What is my dream? We don't know what we want to do. It's much easier to be a bit more depressed and anxious because we don't even have a direction. And as Jerry Welch says, if we have a big enough dream, we don't need a crisis. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. So the 2 forces in yin and yang need to be balanced. And also that's also about getting the body prepped. So if the body's healthy, even if the mind and the emotions are not fully addressed, like maybe there's some trauma from childhood, maybe I'm having a tough time trying to forgive my parents for something, or this arsehole of a teacher that I had at school, or whatever it is, at least the physicality is there to provide a solid enough foundation to deal with the physiological stress felt when dealing with a strong emotion. And this is also related to what's known as the stress bucket. All stress summates in the body. So the body only knows whether it's too stressed or there's too little stress. There's different types of stresses: physical, chemical, electromagnetic, psychic, which we'll be thinking a bit more about today, nutritional and thermal. We need a certain amount of it to be healthy, so the body has a bit of resistance to actually recover from it. But if we got too much of any, the stress level's too high, the body can't take it, and now we start to break down. And that's the concept of physiological load and everything building up. So with the mind and the emotions, we can talk about a load of different things, but I'll just keep it a bit more zeroed in on that. Psychic stress, not having a direction in life, that's a really big stress level. Because even if a lot of stuff is going wrong around you, if you still know what direction you're going in and what you want to do in life, it's a bit easier to handle that, because at least you know the direction you're going in and what you enjoy doing and what you want to do. So no one leaves their personal, professional and spiritual stress at the door or the gym or the clinic. So this is where the holistic approach comes in. It's not a segregated way of looking at things. For an athlete to perform well, they have to address the lifestyle factors. For someone who has a dream of doing a certain thing, be it painting or athletics, whatever it is, for the lifestyle stuff outside of it to be whole, that needs to be there as well. Because if they don't have that, they don't have a Dr. Happiness, and they don't have a direction, and now they're kind of walking a bit aimlessly. And then they're sort of in stasis mode, and they don't really feel like they're being very productive, which can be quite a big psychic stress. And also unresolved trauma and things like that, that's quite a high psychic stress load as well. So I'm keeping it brief because I know we've got a limited amount of time, but one of the things that's really important to think about when addressing anything is what Paul Chet said here: a 1% change a day for 100 days equals a 100% positive change. Health is a process, and that's also manageable too, and that's not too intimidating. So whatever the issue is, if one can commit to addressing it 1% per day, but consistently for 100 days, then massive gains can be made. Maybe it's, I'm just going to go to bed a little bit earlier today. I'm going to drink a little bit more water today. Maybe I can't forgive them yet, but I'm not going to scorn their name today. That's a really important principle to think about, especially with the mind and the emotions, because it's intangible, you can't grasp it. So it's easier to get frustrated because it's not something you can grab. It's something you have to do a lot of mental judo for, and it kind of feels like you're trying to think your way through a maze. But you don't have to get through the whole maze right away. You can get through a little bit consistently. You know eventually all of that will build on each other. So can we have the next slide, please? We need to start with some definitions. Anxiety, depression, body image. Those are the common ones when it comes to mental health. Anxiety is in the future. It's a symptom of a fear that something is coming you can't avoid and are not currently able to defeat, handle, or manage effectively. It's also a fear that the present will be the future. It's also a bit more uppity, like too much stimulation of the nervous system, like that. Depression, that's a bit more physiological. Physical state of low vitality where the body doesn't have the energy it needs to feel happy. Depression is more in the past. It's more like you're just a bit deflated, so you're just a bit down. And I say it's a bit more physiological because it's oftentimes people that feel like they have depression, a lot of the time their adrenal glands are fatigued. And oftentimes depression can come after anxiety because they've been so overstimulated for so long. Adrenaline, cortisol, pumped out by the adrenal glands too often, the adrenals can't rest in between. Now they get fatigued, now they can't produce enough hormone, and now the whole system's just crashing. And then we get like a hypothyroid kind of state. Body image is a person's thoughts, feelings, and perception of their own body's aesthetics and sexual attractiveness. So this is the biological primal chimp side. How do I measure up and am I happy with that? But that's also that's usually related to someone's own perception, which they usually base on other people's reactions. But if people have not yet learned to base that based on their own perception of themselves, then they've attached that to someone else's perception. Now they're not in control of it, and now they feel like a diminished person because they're not in control of how they feel about their own attractiveness. And it's kind of irrelevant what someone else thinks, because what matters is what they think. Which brings us back to the I and then we and then all. Because if it's the other way around, they put we before I. So they haven't satiated themselves in terms of how they view themselves. And when people have not addressed these, they oftentimes become a split individual. And that is commonly called being a neurotic. But in simple definition, a neurosis means, as Carl Jung said, two elements within the individual that are at war with each other. I want to do this, but my ego is telling me something else. And we'll get onto that in a second. But here's a little diagram. I want to do this. This is what I find fun, my dreams, inner child play, parents' desire. But then on the other side, parents' desires, like the example of the arsehole teacher. Well, commandments, no, you can't play. Have to, ant infections, as Paul Chet calls them, wouldn't, shouldn't, couldn't, haven't, all the, or as it says in the Magic of Thinking Big, excuse-itis. So excuses. And if they're disowned, then they can become things like fetishes and compulsions and addictions. But all an addiction is the ego attempting to use an external modality to satiate an inner issue. But an inner issue is not an external thing, so only an inner process will actually satiate it. So, as Dr. Keith Witt says, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. That's why you feel good for a bit, but then you need more. And it can get a bit of it, but it can't fully get it, so then you have to do it all the time, but it's not getting you what you want, which makes it an addiction. But it's trying to satiate an inner issue. Plastic surgery. Too much, like constant need for it. I don't like how I look, so I have to try and use something external to constantly try and do it. Now, that's not to demonize the use of like aesthetics, because aesthetics is an important part of being a human. It's kind of like women with makeup, it's kind of like wearable art. It's not so much the thing to demonize it, it's the place from which it's being used. So, because to demonize it like totally dogmatically wouldn't be holistic, so that's not what I'm saying. It's the place from which it's being used. And finally, boundaries. Being able to say no. Paul Check says your yes has no value until you learn to say no. But one of the problems that people have with saying no, as the comedian Bill Burr put it, I can't put it better, so I had to quote him. It's not saying no we're afraid of, it's the other person's response to our saying no, which makes saying no hard. But if the I is before we, how we feel and what we need matters a bit more than someone else's opinion. So saying no then and setting a boundary is a lot easier. Doesn't mean it's not hard, but it's a lot easier than if we've just disowned at what we need for the sake of what someone else says we should be doing instead. And it does take a lot of bravery to set boundaries, because that boundary may actually be, no, I don't want to go and do that, I don't want to go to university, I don't want to do this. No, you must. We're your parents. Sorry, I don't want to do that. Or teachers, you must do this, to get that. No, sorry, I don't want to do that. Setting boundaries is hard, but at the same time being holistic. If there wasn't that resistance, then we wouldn't learn to actually have strength behind setting a boundary if there was no resistance. So what you're kind of seeing is there's two sides to this. There's always a lesson behind what's challenging if you switch how you view it. And that's really important, especially for mental health, because to just demonize it right away and say this is going on, anxiety, depression, or something like that, this is terrible, that's disowning what the lesson is. If it's like, right, what is this here to teach me? Then we can actually alchemize it into something that's really beneficial and can actually be quite life-changing. So if we can, so this is just the integrated approach. So this is the 4-quadrant model from integral theory. This is the personal interior. This is intangible, one's thoughts, one's feelings, one's soul. This is the exterior, so like the body, our physical self, external things that belong to us that we grew. This is the collective exterior, so this is systems outside nature. These are external things we use. We did not grow ourselves, like I didn't grow that chair, I grew my thumb into that chair. And this is the collective interior. So this is relationship to others. So this is the interpersonal relationship and dynamic we have with other people. But we can have issues with mental emotional issues, and things can pop up in each of these quadrants, but when we take an integrated approach, we can find out which quadrant has the root in it and which is a symptom. Someone could say they have an anxious state, but maybe the root of that is actually they're eating suboptimal food, so they've got low level of neurotransmitters. Maybe they're not producing enough serotonin, they don't have enough tyrosine to produce dopamine, and as a result, they're a little bit more ratty. They're not saying nice things to the people that they've got a relationship with, and that's causing relationship stress, and that's breaking down, that's causing more stress, and now they can't actually do their job, so that's affecting earning potential, and then that's affecting their sense of self. But we need to analyze that, figure out where the root is and what is the symptom. So I'm not going to dive into this too much, but it's just to illustrate how a principle of thinking and a principle overview of how to analyze what is going on. So it's more about how to think as opposed to going through these points, because I know we've got limited time. So if we can go on to the next one. Now, this is more about the interior quadrant, but I know it's a little bit hard to see, but this is a tree. This line here represents kind of like the soil. So this is a metaphoric image which I'll express, and I'll go through those points. But when it comes to identifying the cause of anxiety or depression, just feeling suboptimal, this is a good way to view that. So we can think about this as like the human plant, the human tree. Above the soil, we've got the conscious, physical, the ego, societal conditions, current behavior, and below we've got the unconscious. all the things that we're not aware of. And unconscious means unconscious. If you're even remotely conscious of it, that's not the unconscious. But 95% of the human mind is unconscious. This is also where repressed traumas are. Carl Jung called them repressed shadows. This is also where the soul is, our higher self, what our purpose is. Why are we here? What is our purpose here? Not what we want to do. And I like doing this on a Sunday and something like that. What am I here to do? What's my life purpose? That's the real meaning of Dr. Happiness. What is my dream? What am I really here to do to contribute to the human family? That's what that means. But the distance between the unconscious and current behavior is what's known as a story gap. And the question is it big or is it small? Ken Wilber's quote, Ken Wilber is the founder of integral theory: the greater the gap between the story you tell yourself and the one you tell other people, the greater the likelihood of fatigue, illness, neurosis, and disease. So the bigger this gap is, the greater the chance for mental emotional issues. Now, in simple terminology, that means how honest is the individual being with themselves and with other people? Are they telling themselves one thing and telling someone else something and telling other people something else? If they've got a big story gap, so they're telling someone else, yeah, I'm fine, but they're telling themselves, I hate myself. We've got a really big story gap here, and they're not actually, and those two things are going to be out of alignment. The soul and the higher self will never say, I hate myself. That is what repressed trauma and shadows tell you. The soul and the higher self will only say, I love myself, because it's connected to what created everything, which is, for lack of a better term, unconditional love. But oftentimes those things were put there by people that said those things to other people. And then it's just a case of finding the spiritual courage and bravery to face those things and know that that voice is more important than what those things say. When we start to do that, then what our higher self wants us to do in this life starts to get a bit more to the surface, and then the ego starts to adjust its current behavior to what we're here to do. What that translates to, maybe someone wants to be a painter, or they want to build a business, but someone always told them you wouldn't amount to anything. But then they start actually addressing those issues and allow that voice of, no, you're here to do that, you can do that, you're allowed to do that, you deserve to be here and contribute that. Other people's opinions don't matter. If it's an opinion that's contributing to that, like yes you can, listen to it. If it's one to say, no, you can't do that, you're not here to do that, you're not allowed to do that, you wouldn't amount to anything, they're irrelevant, you're not talking. Those are small little rain clouds that will pass by. When we allow that, when we address those, allow that to be louder, current behavior starts to adjust. And then the purpose of what we're here to do starts to come through. And then oftentimes, that alone, anxiety will go away. Because anxiety can be felt when the soul wants to come through. It's trying to unconsciously push through that purpose. But these are too loud. The ego and current behavior is actually doing what this says instead of the higher self. And because the higher self wants the future to be what it wants to be, but current behavior is still playing out traumas, which Caroline Mice would call woundology. So living out my wounds, someone told me I can't do it and I just believed them. Then the future that the higher self wants, it's not going towards it. So now if we're anxious about the future because we feel like we have something to give, we can't give it because we're not actually taking steps towards it. But when we start to understand that there is this going on, we can address what the obstacles and then find actually gratitude for the obstacles, because on the other side we feel pretty damn strong. Like if I can do that, what's going to stop me from doing anything else? And finally, Carl Jung's quote here, No tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. So unless the roots actually touch those things and reach down to hell, the soul isn't going to grow our life purpose in here up to heaven. And we're not going to have the staying power and the awareness of ourselves to maintain that and hold that purpose until we've actually gone inward and dealt with these things. So I'm just going to run through a couple of other things. Like I know that was a more in-depth slide, and I know we've got limited time. I want to make sure there's no questions. But again, this is more, these points are kind of reflecting what I was saying. So there are other factors for anxiety like dehydration. That would be related to doctor diet. Simple things like that can have a big thing. 1% dehydration, 10% performance loss. Try being kind to someone when you're dehydrated. It's going to be a lot harder. Or sleep deprived, that's another one. Those are very, so sometimes it doesn't have to be as deep and below the surface as this. Sometimes it can be very simple, dehydration or sleep, but all of it matters. So that's what I'm trying to illustrate. No organic food, excess toxicity, organ systems that are responsible for detoxification, overloaded, poor gut health, can't absorb nutrients, leaky gut, immune response. There's a lot of surface level stuff that really contribute to mental emotional states, but oftentimes this is the root, and then the more surface level stuff are exacerbators. So if we've got this going on, but then we also have like poor food and poor sleep and dehydration, sometimes it can feel 10 times worse. Yeah. So if you just flip the slide, so I won't run down too much, but being anxious, as I mentioned before, can overstress the adrenal glands, and hormonally you feel frazzled. Your nervous system's just a bit shot. So when the depression usually comes, is usually after anxiety. Sometimes it can come before, like if people aren't eating properly, and the anxiety can come afterwards, but depression is usually afterwards. And it just means that your adrenal glands are fried, because there's been so much suboptimal thinking going on, causing the body to be in fight or flight constantly, so it hasn't had an opportunity to rest. The adrenal glands have just been constantly pumping out adrenaline and cortisol. They just get too fatigued. They can't actually keep up because they need to actually have rest time in between. It's like a factory. A factory producing something, the workers need to go home and sleep and then come back and make stuff. They can't do it constantly. The adrenal glands are insane. And then what we have, when the stress is chronic, like if someone's not actually, like the diagram with the tree, if someone's not aligned with what their purpose is, but it wants to break through and they're just not doing it, the stress can feel chronic, and then the adrenal glands are responding constantly over and over and over again, and then we get hormone dysfunction, low energy, then that leads to exhaustion, depressed mood, life feels depressed, and then anxiety can come back again because people want to work and do what they would like to do, but they just feel like they don't have the energy to do it. So now we've got like a negative hamster wheel going. So I think we'll leave it there, and so we can have some time for questions. I know that was potentially a little bit deep and a bit of a rant, but when it comes to a holistic approach, it needs to be taken into consideration, because otherwise we're not getting to the root of the issue, and then people can't heal. And that's not what we want. We want the whole human family to be as evil as possible. So that's where the complexity comes from. It's not complicated, it's complex. Because humans, I don't know anything more complex than a human being. Even AI. AI doesn't hold a candle to the complexity of a human being. Because AI doesn't have a soul. Humans do. So we've got to deal with that as well as all the physiological stuff. But that's where the depth comes in. So thank you very much for listening. And if you guys have any questions, then feel free to ask them, and I'll keep answering until they kick me out. So if you have any questions, then do feel free. Maybe something like it was making sense, but you want me to go over it again, or you want maybe something individual, just let me know. And, yes.
Just the first part, sorry about that.
That's okay.
That part somewhere. Depression is something that I absolutely love.
Right.
I love the word. Depression. Does everybody suffer depression?
I would say everyone can, but it's for each individual to say, because I don't know if I haven't talked to everybody.
Can I pose a question to the audience?
Sure.
You don't mind, you?
Go ahead.
Sorry about this.
Do you mind being on camera?
No, I don't mind at all. Can I ask, how many in the audience suffer depression? Any of you suffer depression? Yeah? Depression. For a long time, I suffered with it. I suffered with it. Tried to commit suicide. But the reason I asked the question, because today mental health is two of the strongest words that will kill people. And depression today, I look at, all that, yeah, beautiful, but is caused by life stresses. And depression is just moods. When you're in a mood, self-esteem, loss of self-esteem, what do you do to avoid? Because a lot of us use the foods, use the diet, and the best way to get out of depression is lift your energies. And that's what you do with people, don't you? Exercise and everything to get them out the energy, get their energy up. Because you're in a negative energy when you had enough, you've got no money, or the missus is on your case. I'm pointing at this guy by now, I don't know why I've been drawn to yourself. But that's what, and I ask the question to a lot of people because today in the modern world we're in, we say depression, anxiety. I just focus on the anxiety is beautiful because the brain is negatively wired. If it was positive, if you're in a positive context, with anxiety, there's no control and no certainty. Well, to be in a more positive mindset, to achieve something, you haven't got no control and you haven't got no certainty. I just wanted to see from that dynamic, to see how many people did suffer depression and what do they know of depression. Because that's what we miss out a lot of times.
With that, it's the brain is negatively wired, but the soul is not.
No, the spirit is not, no.
The spirit and the soul and the spirit are two slightly different things.
Yeah.
So the soul itself is our as Carl Jung would say, it's our individuated face of, for lack of a better term, this loaded term, God, in each individual. And spirit is the flow of energy and information.
Yeah. So the divine spirit, well, see, I don't say God because of God it's something bigger than me.
Well, God,
and we all answer it.
Well, God has a bit. It's a word that's got a few barnacles on it.
Yeah.
But the question is, what is your ego identified with? Because if your ego is identified with your body, then what one is feeling, one will identify with.
Yeah.
If someone is aware of their soul and they're identified with it, then when the challenges come, they're not going to identify with the challenges. They're going to understand that there is a lesson there.
Yes.
And that's also part of being on the hero's journey.
Yeah.
So it's not to say that everyone suffers with it. Everyone has the potential to.
When you say it's part of human existence, or is it an illness?
I would say that labeling it can, because it also depends which archetype is active. Because with the work of Caroline Weiss, like everyone has 4 survival archetypes. Like they've got the victim, the saboteur, the prostitute, and the child.
Yes.
Everyone has those, but there's a certain quality about each one. But it's whether someone is identified too deeply with a particular archetypal energy.
So we just talk about the conscious mind in the moment.
Yeah.
Of the 7 levels of consciousness. So victim, conflict, responsibility, which we avoid a lot of taking responsibility.
Yeah.
We use attachments. We use attachments in life. Yeah. So I just want to see the tape. That's all. Because depression to me today is communicated as it's an illness. or is something that we've got to be frightened of, and we haven't. We just got to have a better understanding.
Yeah, because like in the first half, like I know you did a little bit later.
Yeah,
on.
sorry about that.
No, it's okay. But in the first half,
Yeah,
it's understanding how these things can come about, because awareness is what regulates. When you can kind of understand how things fit together, then when something comes up, it's easier to not identify with it. 'Cause when you identify with it, that's kind of like being in the washing machine as opposed to looking at the washing machine. And when you're in the washing machine, it's really hard to kind of make sense of what's up, what's down, what's left, what's right. But when you're looking at it, you see things spinning. Maybe the door's open, you're getting spat at by the water, but at the same time, you know you're not in it. And that also borders on what's known as witnessing. I feel this, but I'm not this. But you can only know you feel this and you're not this when you're identifying with the higher self, and I'm here to do this.
You're observing.
And then even if you're feeling pain is an acronym.
Yes.
Prompting attention in the now.
no, yeah,
So when it comes up, instead of getting immersed and enmeshed with it, you can ask yourself, what is this here to teach me? And then you can also start to address those archetypal patterns, because like the wounded child is an archetypal pattern that's quite strong, and every archetype has this want to stay, and sometimes we need to pull off that archetype, which I was talking about, the voices, like maybe someone had some teacher, parents that said this. Those things need to be addressed, and then that archetype can go, and then the desire of the higher self can actually break through, and the positive voice of yes, you can do this can start to dominate, and then current behavior can align to that higher voice, as opposed to current behavior following all of the wounded voice. So
right. I'd love to meet you again and
Yeah, sure.
sit down with you and spend some